Omer Rav Chisda, we are now on the topic of Vavam and Beis. Ubi Ichui Alexandri. We're not talking about any kind of, you know, amateur mending and repairing. What's usher in repairing a kriya is to do a real professional mending. And that's what they did in Alexandria. Once again, we need a little bit of a picture or a lesson in sewing. It says the Alexandrians would sew the fabric from the inside of the garment. That's really cool. So it means on the outside, you didn't even see the rip. The exterior would appear even. And then there were ends that were torn, which would protrude, but it was on the other side, not klape chutz. So if you do this kind of repair, like the Alexandrian repair, then the mend, it's the fact that there was one to rip here and you mended it is hardly noticeable. They would add a set of small stitches on the outside and bring the edges closer together. Again, this is the Alexandrian method of mending. And it's like a perfect kind of repair. And that's what's prohibited. Tan Rabbanan, we learned in the Brisa, Korea mitoch hashalal. Let's say you had a garment and you had to cut kriya on the garment, and afterwards, which would mean after Shiva, in the case of most relatives, after parent would be after Shloshim, then you're allowed to do what's called basting, right? Those are the loose stitches, which is called shalal, broad stitches. And now, Nebuch has to be Korea a second time, either because he lost another relative, or he saw Yerushalayim b'Chorbana, etc., etc. And the question now is he creating a kriya? And the repair of the first kriya, which he's now ripping, that repair was a very slapshot repair. It wasn't a real full repair. It was only shalal. Or mitoch hamalah, or mitoch haleket. In all these cases, lo yotza. Why? Because the original kriya is still in existence. However, mitoch ha'ichui, if you did the Alexandrian method of repair, then the original kriya is gone, and now we could do the same kriya again at the same exact spot, and he's yotze the second kriya. Yotze. Rav Chisda be'ichui Alexandria. Rabbanon Rashoy lahofcho lemata ulachoso. After he does kriya, he's allowed to take that kriya, the part of the beggar that's korea, and he could switch it around so that it's no longer on the top of his beggar. Right, they used to do kriya near the neck on the top. He could turn around his beggar, especially like a poncho or something like that. And now the kriya, instead of being on the top of his beggar, is on the bottom of his beggar. Rav Shimon Elazar Osa Lachosa. Rav Shimon Elazar says that even after he inverts his beggar, it still has a chain kriya to it, and therefore the itzer ichui to repair it still is in place. Now, what happens if you cut kriya? You were obligated to kriya, and now you want to sell the garment. So even the buyer is enjoined from repairing the ichui. It means repairing the kriya. What I mean to say is that the kiyum of kriya is not in the gavra, but rather in the chefza. It's in the beged itself. If it was in the gavra, then it depends on ownership. So Ruvain owns the beged, he's chayiv in kriya, and that kriya was fulfilled. Ruvain did the kriya. Now he sells the beged to Shimon. Shimon is not chayiv in kriya, and therefore he could repair the beged. Man, that's not the halacha. The halacha is that the kriya is not just a maisa kriya of the bailim, of the avel, but it's also a kiyum in the chefza. The chefza becomes a beged karua. And then after Mina is that if somebody buys that beged, it still retains that status of a beged karua, which doesn't allow ichu. Tana Rabbana, we learned in the Brisa, Tchilas Kriya Tefach. Tosefes Sholosh Etzbos. This Gemara, this Brisa, is addressing two different scenarios. First of all, let's say a person was taken into the Mikdash in a carriage. Afterwards, he saw Yerushalayim on his way out. So he did a first Kriya at the site of the ruins of the Mikdash, and then he extends that Kriya when he gets to the city of Yerushalayim and he sees Yerushalayim b'churban. That's scenario number one. Scenario number two is he lost a relative and he sat Shiva, and after Shiva, he finds out Nebuch about another relative of his that died, so he extends the Kriya of the garment from the first Avelis. What are the two Kriyas? The main Kriya, the original Kriya, and the extended Kriya. That's a machlokes recorded here in the Bryce. So we'll go, first we start with the Shita Rabbi Meir. The original Kriya has to be a Tefach. This we already derived from Sukkim by David HaMelech. And the Tosefes, the second Kriya, is Sholosh Etzbos. There are 4 Etzbos in a Tefach, and the extension is only 3 Tefach, 3 Etzbos. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, no, I'm going to lower the standards. Hilas Kriya, the original Kriya, is Sholosh Etzbos. In other words, according to Rabbi Yehuda, when a person does Kriya, he can do Kriya with 3 fingers. So if he rips it 3 fingers worth, that's already Kriya. And then Tosefes Kolshin. All he needs for the Tosefes is the smallest amount. Amar Ula, halacha k'Rabbi Meir b'Kriya, halacha k'Rabbi Yehuda b'Tosefes. We're going to split this down the middle. As far as the original Kriya is concerned, we're going to require a tefach like Rabbi Meir l'chumra. And the Gemara is going to ask, why don't you paskin like Rabbi Yehuda l'kula and allow for sholosh etzbos? We have a principle of halacha k'divrei hamekel ba'avil. And with regard to Tosefes, here we're going to be mekel like Rabbi Yehuda, and all you need is a kolsh. Tanya nami hachi, Rabbi Yossi Omer tchilas kriya tefach v'Tosefes kolsh. Rabbanon Amrulo Mace Aviv Vikara. This is hard for me to read. Mace Beno V'Hos. So now he has one long kriya, part of which is al avivimo. There's no ichur. You cannot repair that. But the rest of the kriya on the bottom, al beno, that allows kriya. I'm sorry, ichur. You're allowed to repair it after shloshet. So therefore, tachto misache, elyon eina misache. He's allowed to repair the lower part of this cut, but not the upper part. The upper part was from vimo, which has to remain ripped liolo. Now we have the flip side. Mace benovakara. So the top kriya lends itself to ichui, and then he extends the kriya, Mace aviv hosif, is elyon misache, v'tachton eina misache. Clear? In other words, he's allowed to repair the top part, which was al beno, but not the bottom part, which is al avivimo, which never allows for repair. Mace aviv, mace imo, mace achiv, mace achoso, it's like a pigua. Did anybody here remember the word Subaro, the pizza shop? Does that mean anything to anybody? Yeah. Remember that? I was at the Leviathan He buried 5 children and 2 parents. There were 2 children that survived. They were family originally from Switzerland. Sveta Svuda. I don't know how to pronounce it correctly the way they pronounce it. So what should he do? He hears about Nebuch, all these members of his family that died. Korea kera echad l'kul. According to Tanakama, 1 kriya suffices. You can kill 2 birds, many birds with 1 stone. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says, Al kula keret, but al avivimo kerach. He says that you cannot swallow up the kriya of aviv v'imo together with the kriya of the other relatives, because aviv v'imo is a separate, independent chovas maisa kriya. And we saw many nafkaminas about the kriya al aviv v'imo. For example, we said you can't repair it. L'fisha ein mosifin al kera aviv v'imo. What are you going to do? You're going to extend it? No. There's also seeing an extension. You need a full-fledged kriya for aviv v'imo. My timer. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak l'fi she'enon b'tosefes. When it comes to parents, you can't be yotzi achiv kriya with a tosefes, just by extending the original kriya that was on another relative. Amar Shmuel halacha ki Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, which means this is not a fulfillment of the rule of halacha ki divrei hamekel ba'avil. We're going to be machmir like Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira and require a separate kriya for avivimo. So the Gemara is going to raise the following question: V'yamar Shmuel hacha hachi v'amar Shmuel halacha ki divrei hamekel ba'avil. So we should pass like the Tanakama against Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, and all you need is to extend the kriya. You don't need a separate new kriya al avivimo. The Gemara answers avelus l'chud and kriya. Although halacha k'divrei ha'avel b'mekel, halacha k'divrei ha'mekel b'avel, I meant to say, but not with regard to kriya. Why not? So here we have 2 approaches. Give me a minute to find my place here. Just 1 second. Why am I finding it now? Maybe it's somewhere else. So first of all, he quotes the Nemuki Yosef that kriya comes before Avelus, and Avelus is only after the burial, correct? Whereas kriya is, earlier when he hears about the death. So kriya obviously is not generated by Avelus. It's a separate machayah. Secondly, he says, although we don't have Avelus on Yontif or on Chol Moed, but kriya is performed even on Chol Moed. I don't know why, honestly, he doesn't mention this, but I would have thought, that kriya is doraisa and Avelus is d'rabbanan. At Heichan Koreh, how, you start from the neck, how far down do you have to rip? And the first man, the Omar, that's the Tanakama, says ad tiburo, all the way down to his puppet. The Yeshom, in the second opinion, is ad libo, up to his heart. I believe that's how we pass it. Afal pisha ein rayel davar zeichel. And it says, v'kiru levavchem v'al bigdeichem. Again, this is only a zeichel. It's not really proof, because this is a pasuk in Yoel, and Yoel is saying that it's not enough to do the outer signs of tshuva and repentance. You have to do it in your heart, and your heart should be, so to speak, ripped and torn in your tshuva. Now we go back to the Tanakama. The Tanakama says higel tiburo, that he has to rip all the way down to his navel. and now another relative dies. Is marchik sholosh etzbos v'korea. On the same beged, I assume we're talking about very poor people. So on the same beged, he moved to the right or to the left 3 etzbos worth, and that's enough to do a new kriya. 1 second. Points out in the notes that again, if there would be a third kriya, then again he'd have to move another 3 etzbos, and so forth and so on. Then it says nismale milafonov. So in the front half, every garment has a front half on his chest and a back on his back, and nismale milafonov. Again, this case where many, many relatives died, so the whole front is full of kriyos. It's machziro lachorov. He can take the front of his garment and turn it around to the back. Now he has the back up in front, and he starts again with kriyos. Nismale milamala. What happens if he did kriyos on the top part of his beged? Let's say, according to Yomi says ad libo. So there's no more room for future additional kriyos on the top. Then he can turn the beged the other direction. The top becomes the bottom becomes the top, and now he has room on the top, which used to be the bottom, to do kriyos. But if he did not turn the beged around, he just ripped the bottom part of his beged, or he rips the sides of the beged, but not from the top of the beged, then lo yot. A Kohen Gadol who loses one of his relatives. Now, a Kohen Gadol is not allowed to do kriya. That's a separate law in the Torah. In Vayikra Perikov Aleph. But he tears the bottom of his garment, which is not a kriya that he's allowed to do, only to express his sorrow. He needs some sort of a psychologist. What would they call that? Psychology. You need word is on the tip of my tongue. An outlet. Excellent. You need an outlet to your grief. So it's not a halachic kriya, it's just an outlet to his grief. Poligbar of Masna Umar Ukva. In other words, one of them was quoting Avua de Shmuel, the other one was quoting Levi. We don't know who said what right now, but Chad Omar Kol Shiva Korea and Liachar Shiva Mos. If he lost a second relative during the Shiva, then he starts a brand new kriya. We have to understand why. I mean, again, just psychologically, we could say that it looks like he's expressing such great mourning over the original first relative that died, because he's still in Shiva. But the Gemara is going to give a different explanation. The Achar Shiva, if he hears about the death of another relative after Shiva, then he's allowed to add the Tosefes, which we said might be 3 etzbos, might be a mashu. Chanomer, according to the other opinion, Kol Shloshim Korea. During the entire 30-day period, he would have to do a new kriya. But liachar shloshim mos, only after 30 days of avelus, then he can extend the kriya. Maskif la Rab Zera. Now Rab Zera is going to try to show that one of these two opinions makes sense, the other is difficult. Mandi Omer Kol Shiva Korea. If you're going to say that he needs a brand new kriya, the entire Shiva, Amai, what's the logic behind that? We try to offer a psychological explanation. The Gemara has a halachic explanation. The lo nitan l'shololo, because the law that you're allowed to do these broad stitches, that's called shololo, that only applies after Shiva. And then he can repair it completely after Shlosh. I mean, we're not talking about Avima. So since we're in a period of time where he's not allowed to do even the most minimal repairing, is therefore there's no possibility of creating a kriya unless you start from the beginning. Elahadi Omar Ma. But now we have another statement which we had on Daf Chav Beis, that Aisha Shalalalto Li'alter, we're going to allow a woman to begin repairing with this broad stitch repair of Shalalto immediately. Right? For the sake of, we'll call it tznius right now, the Gemara is going to give another word for it, but in any event, this is allowed immediately, meaning even during Shiva. And the logic, therefore, should compel us to assume that if she hears about another relative who died, then even during Shiva, she should be able to extend the Kriya. She doesn't require a new independent Kriya because you're already in the situation of Shalom. And yet, the Brisa said that during Shiva, you need a new Kriya, and there's no din of extension. So Gemara answers no. As far as Dini Avelus is concerned, the Machayev Avelus is both men and women are equal, and the woman likewise is not allowed to do the Sholel during Shiva. The only heter that allows her to do the Sholel is Mishum Kvoda Isha. It's only a matter of Hakavah. That's a separate matter, but in Hilchos Avelus, then she's not allowed to do the Sholel, and therefore extending the Kriya during Shiva would be unacceptable. Mind the Omer Kol Shloshim Korea, that within the entire 30-day period of Avelus after the Tvura, on a second relative, you need a new Kriya. So what are you going to tell me? Why do you need a new Kriya? Delo Nitan Lachoso, because you cannot repair it fully until after Shloshim. Ella, but according to that logically, are you going to tell me that in the case of V'imo, where there's no possibility, no leniency whatsoever to allow you to repair the Kriya in a perfect way, then if another relative dies, then there's not going to be any heter for tosefes, for extension. You're always going to require a new kriya. So Gemara says, no, that's not a kasha. In fact, the Avelus ends after 30 days, and at that point, there should be a heter to repair the garment, but we should cover Avima. It's a separate independent machayev. Therefore, we don't allow you to mend and repair the beged. But if not for the extra concept of kvod, aviv, ve'imo, if not for that, then there would be a heter to repair the garment. And therefore, there's no deterrent to enlarging to do the tosefes of the kriya if a second death is reported. Imagine a person once sat shiva, he lost a relative, he has in his wardrobe, he's got a beged karua that's sitting on the thing. Or maybe just he happens to have a beged karua, a ripped garment. So he goes out with a ripped garment in order to fool the people and fool the deceased as if he did a kriya, which is not so. It's like he stole from the live people, fooling them, and even from the deceased by robbing that deceased of the kavod, the honor that he deserves through kriya. Rav Shimon Gamliel Omer lechavero. A man says to his friend, lend me your garment. I'm going to see my father. He's in the ICU, in a hospital. He's in very bad shape. Can I borrow your garment? So when the person lends him his garment, he already knows, he anticipates the possibility that this man's father might never pass on. And therefore, the holech umatzo mes, when the son who borrowed a garment shows up at his father's bedside, he finds that his father already is gone. Koro, he's allowed to do kriya. Imagine, he's allowed to do kriya on someone else's beged. He's basically destroying someone else's beged. But ma'acho, he's obligated to repair the beged. So we're going to allow him to do kriya because the person who lent him the beged knew up front, anticipating the possibility that he might have to do kriya, and allowed him to do kriya, but he doesn't have to lose the garment in terms of its value on the market. And therefore, we're going to allow the Avel, Al-Aviv, to do a reparation on the garment and repair. Normally, we're not allowed to do that, but here we're allowed to do it because it'd be a ganaf if he doesn't repair the lender's garment. He's got to pay it. But let's say he borrowed a garment. He didn't tell him he's going to visit his father who's deathly ill in the hospital. Then even though he has a chiv kriya and everyone's going to, he's going to be embarrassed and disgraced that he didn't do kriya, but nevertheless, he's not allowed to do kriya and rip someone else's garment to be a mazik for the sake of his embarrassment or his chiv kriya. Never a person is chole, and now he loses one of his relatives. Ein modino so shemetz. It's very dangerous to tell this person, notify him, he's sick in a hospital, notify him that he has a relative that died. Shemati tarif daitol. His mind becomes completely befuddled. The ein makarin lefanim, you shouldn't do kriya in his presence. Umeshaskin is anoshim in front of the noshim who are professional singers. They used to sing the kinos, so we're not going to allow them to sing the kinos and lament in his presence. Now another law, different law. A Katan, very young child, lost a relative. Never. Umekarin lekatan, we're going to rip the garment that the Katan is wearing, not because of the mitzvah of kriya. The Katan is not obligated in the mitzvah of kriya, but mipnei agmas nefesh. It's sort of an expression of weeping, of lamenting. The Koran al Chamiv, the al Chamosov, if a person wants to identify with his wife's mourning over a parent, then mipnei kvod ishto, he does kriya. I don't know if we like this. Is there any footnote in maybe your Gemara whether we? Because I had this shaila recently, I lost my father. Amar Papa, Tanav Biavel Rabbas learned in the Brisa. Avelo Yaniach Tinok Besoch Cheko. He shouldn't take, he's sitting Shiva and take a baby into his chest, into his lap. Because if there's anything antithetical to Avelus, to the state of grief, Avel Shebelev, it is levity and happiness, laughter. And when you have a child, you go, you start laughing. Now, I don't know why Rav Papa felt compelled to add these 4 words. I don't know. But maybe it means that he's miskana because why are you laughing during your Avelus? The Ein Mavrin Ella al Mitos Sekufos. We said that after the Kfura, the first meal is called the Sudas Havra. And those who are serving the Sudas Havra, they're not Avelim. They will sit on regular beds, upright beds, the kufos. Those who are Avelim will sit on a mita kfuya. Can a friend, a very close friend, identify with the Avelus of his friend? And that's called libo gaspo. Yavru al mitos kfuyos. And when they bring the Sudas Afra, this good friend who's very close to the mourner is allowed to sit down on an upturned bed, an upside down bed, and eat together with the Avelim as an identification to identify with the Avelim. But if he's not a very, very close friend, Yavru al mitos kufos. He should stand, or he should sit on an upright bed like all the others. Rava Isra bar Milsa. Rava had an avelus. All legabe Abba bar Marta to Abba bar Yomi. And this Abba felt that he was a close buddy of Rava, and therefore he sat on an upturned bed. Rava Zakif, Rava gave him a bed to sit on, a couch to sit on in its normal upright position. You're not an Ovel, I'm an Ovel. And Abba bar Marta coffee, and Abba bar Marta turned the bed upside down to identify with the Avelus of Rava, his good friend, and to sit in a mita kfuya and eat from the Sudas Havra. Omar, Rava said, wait a minute, Mi Samcha, like, who made you my close friend? Kamal lespe daite laitsur me'arbana. This young scholar is missing das. He's missing common sense. And here there's a whole discussion in the Mefarshim. How could Rava be so harsh and say about this guy, just because he wanted to identify with the Avelus, and calling him like he lesbe das, he doesn't have a head. So that's a whole discussion. Tan Rabbanu, we learned in a brisa. A person on his road, on the journey, he hears about the death of a relative, and he became an Ovel. And here we turn to Daf Chav Zayin. Im yochel amayit be'isko yemayit, im lav yegalgel imahem. So if he can limit or suspend all of his activity, he's on a business trip, then he should limit it, because we said that an Ovel during Shiva is not to be engaged in business. That's a Hesech Hadas from his Avelus. He's distracted from his Avelus. In Lab, but if this is very similar to what we learned about Chol Moed called the Dover Ave. He's on his way to a very important business activity, then Yigalgel Imoyen. He's not allowed to go by himself, but he can join others who are not Avelu in this business enterprise, in this activity, this business activity. So there were people who accompany him on this business trip. He's allowed to go with them. And this is where we're going to stop for today. On the top of Daf Chav Zayin, Amid Aleph Mitzvah Shem, we'll pick that up tomorrow. Okay, then?
Thank you.
Let me wish you a great day.
Thank you.